You know, when you look at a cathedral, especially, you see this so much in Orthodox cathedrals, you know, there's a dome, right? Well, that's the sky, obviously, and you often see Christ, Pantocrator, creator of the world, arrayed in the dome, right, looking down. It's a very strange representation. You know, what carpenter from Galilee simultaneously being some deity that is associated with the sky? It's an unbelievably complicated idea. But part of what it's pointing to is the ultimate sacredness of a kind of union, a uniting principle. Well, that's the word. That's what that means. The sacred word. And you think, well, you don't believe that. Well, then you're a liar, at least. So this belief, you know, people ask me all the time if I believe in God, and I say, well, what do you mean by believe? And they think, well, that's obvious, and you're just avoiding the question. It's like, it's not obvious. You think it's obvious because you haven't thought about it. It's not obvious at all what it means to believe. So we have an instinct for that unity, and we approach that partly by responsibility. And so you take on responsibility, you know, and it gives your life purpose. Well, why? Well, part of it's this, you know. There's a lot of suffering in the world, and unless you're malevolent, that's not something that you are attempting to make worse, let's say. Well, at minimum, if you're responsible for your family, well, you can shield them from some suffering, and like in a productive way, a way that makes them stronger. Well, then, no, when you're alone at night torturing yourself with your stupidity and uselessness, at least you can say to yourself, well, you know, look what I'm doing here. I'm removing some unnecessary hell. Well, what else is going to get you through a dark night? We do our students, young people, such a disservice by not teaching them this about responsibility. It's like you need the meaning. It's not optional in the face of life's suffering. Not unless you want to become bitter, not unless you want to crave death. And if you don't know what that means, that bitterness, that craving for death, it just means you haven't been there. And that's a blessing for you, but it's also a spectacular form of ignorance.
I thought it was interesting you've been talking about music. I was listening to Jimi Hendrix the other day, and I was thinking, man, if he was the world's greatest guitarist, why was he still so unhappy? Maybe he wasn't unhappy, but did people know what he was really talking about when he said, I'm not experienced, or, you know, are you experienced? Not necessarily stoned, but experienced. I realized everyone's really experienced. Maybe everyone just wants to be happy, and money's just a coping mechanism because they want to help other people. Do you think Jimi Hendrix was just misunderstood?
Well, I imagine he was misunderstood because everyone is. But, you know, that engagement in art of that sort, that's one of the certain antidotes to suffering. It doesn't make it go away, but it might make it bearable. Beauty does that. You know, that's why people go to Europe so often on pilgrimages, even if they don't think that's what they're doing. They want to immerse themselves in that spectacular beauty because it's an antidote to suffering. And it's a call to higher things, but a call to higher things is also an antidote to suffering. And a great musician partakes in that insofar as he can. It doesn't mean that he'll be necessarily any more well-adjusted psychologically on other fronts than other people who used other means to bolster their existential concerns, let's say. So, yeah, a musician like that, at least, and this, I was obsessed with the meaning of music for a very long time because I realized I made a sculpture of it, which some of you may have seen. It's an image that I use all the time, which is it's an image of this sculpture I made trying to portray the meaning of music because I realized that music was pointing to meaning in a manner that wasn't propositional or subject to rational criticism. It's a transcendent form of meaning, right? I mean, you go to a concert and someone says, you know, that's just noise. What do you say? You're an idiot. Go away, right? Because that argument has no place in what's happening. And what music demonstrates, and demonstrates to everyone, and it's such a relief, is that immersement in meaning is actually an experience. Right? It has nothing to do with belief in some sense. It's way deeper than that. And it's absolutely necessary. It's not, you know, some mere byproduct of other cognitive mechanisms, let's say. Psychologists play that game a lot, but they have their reasons for that. I hope that's an answer.
Do you think a lot of people know he fought in Vietnam?
I have no idea.
Do you think a lot of people just think he was talking about being stoned?
Again, it's outside my domain of competence to speculate on such things. Another question?
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Peterson, for giving the talk. I drove 4 hours today to come see you, so it's really great to be able to ask you a question personally. My question has to do with the topic tonight. I've been trying to formulate it for a while now, and it's basically under what circumstances, if any, would self-preservation be taken more important than standing for your beliefs, as in the form of free speech? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
So that's one of those questions you have to take apart again before you can answer them. It depends on what you mean by self. Depends on what you mean by preservation. And I'm not trying to take your question lightly. You know, what you see happening very often is that people take the easy way out in the moment and sacrifice future possibilities, often that they don't even understand. And I see this continually, especially when I was dealing with people who were trying to straighten out their family psychologically. There's issues that they just wouldn't discuss, and no wonder, because it was going to be hell to discuss them, but not nearly as much hell as not discussing them. And that's the issue, and that's the conundrum. I don't think I can specify the circumstances. I would say it's not, you can't encapsulate that within a series of propositions in some sense. I would say more, you have to orient yourself so that you're able to answer those questions for yourself. And how do you do that? Well, one way of doing that is, well, to listen. That's definitely one way. The other is not to say things you believe to be false. Why would you do that? Well, because you build defects into your character by practicing deception. Well, then when a problem like that comes around, which is a big problem, you're not going to be able to answer it. And God only knows what that's going to cost you. Like, it might cost you your conscience. It might cost you your family. It might cost you your country. So you have to build yourself into the person that can answer such questions for himself. You know, why not lie if you can get away with it? Well, first of all, that's a big if. And the second is, well, because you build yourself into a liar. And then in a moment of crisis, you won't be able to trust your judgment. And then you'll be lost. And that's a vision of hell if you take it seriously. And I'm dead serious about that. So, yeah.
It's an honor, sir. You've dramatically helped my life in a number of ways. I've had this question I wanted to ask you for some time. I've seen you mention multiple times how the positive impact and help you have been able to give others has been a rewarding aspect of your life, even an antidote or justification for suffering. What advice would you give to those who wish to positively impact others through the avenue you do, which is to find and then speak truth? What advice would you give to someone who wants to speak truth to the world like you do? And then a second one on topic, how do we stand against the current tyranny against free speech?
Well, you stand against that tyranny in your own life first, because your proclivity to lie is part of the totalitarian impulse. It's the same thing. And so if you don't fight that in your soul first, you won't be able to fight it successfully anywhere else. You know, that's why Solzhenitsyn said that the line between good and evil runs down the heart of every individual. He meant that in relationship to totalitarian certainty. It's fundamentally a psychological issue as far as I'm concerned. And that's partly because the individual, in a very fundamental way, is sovereign. And the voice of the individual is the savior of the state. Practically speaking, well, first, you know, you want to decide that maybe you're not going to lie anymore. You know, you've got to think that through. It's got to be a vow, let's say, or an aim. And then I think you can think it through. I watch this a lot in therapy. One of the things I really learned being a therapist, and I spent most of my time listening, believe it or not, even though I talk incessantly, I did learn to listen as a therapist. I could tell when I wasn't listening enough because the person got boring. And so I knew that if the session, my mind started to wander in the session, instead of me being sort of riveted on what the person was saying, that I wasn't listening hard enough. And so I got distracted by something. But if I listened harder, then they'd get more interesting. And the degree to which they were interesting was precisely proportionate to the degree to which they were telling the truth. And the deeper the truth they were telling, the more interesting they were. And so that was a fascinating thing to observe. And it was fascinating as well to see how interesting people were, regardless of who they were, if you really listen to them. Because people are very strange creatures. And I mean, they're so strange that their strangeness is terrifying to themselves. You know, once they step outside the domain of polite conventionality, let's say, or the prison of totalitarian certainty, they step outside of that into the realm of reality. They're unbearably interesting. It's like continual Dostoevsky novels. And if you don't experience that people are boring, no, it's you. It's not people. Believe me, if it's people or you, it's you. Yeah, that's for sure. So, one of the things that I discussed with my clients, and this came partly from Rogerian practice, was this idea of something like an emotional congruity. At times you can feel that your words are in alignment with you. You know, and part of that is that shame you feel when you know you're wandering from the truth for some underhanded reason of your own. You feel that. You can feel that. And, you know, you fight the feeling and you deny it, and so then you diminish your expertise at perceiving it, and then, of course, that makes it easier for you to lie, and it's like downhill from there. But you can practice that, and you can feel your words. You can see if they're solid. You can see if you believe them, you know, while you're saying them. If I got the word right? You know, when I was teaching my students to write, it's like, is the word right? Is it the right word? Is it the right phrase? Is it solid? Why should I care? I'll write what the professor wants. Of all the sins that universities commit, the enticing of students to parrot what the professor wants is the worst. To teach those students to corrupt their word. And so, you students out there, you say, oh, I have to write what the professor wants. And you think you won't think that afterwards. Well, you will. You think you can write down what you don't believe and you won't believe it. That doesn't happen. You write down something you don't believe, you're way closer to believing it. You think you're immune from your own arguments? You think that delineating and articulating a complex argument that runs contrary to what you truly believe in your soul won't tilt you in that direction? It's like, who do you think you are? That isn't how things work. And it's highly unlikely that you've thought out anything in your life as deeply as you're thinking out what you're writing to please that professor. And it's not the professor you're pleasing, it's whatever demon they're possessed by. So you start to listen to what you say and see, you haltingly, have I got it right? Not like your life depends on it, like your soul depends on it. Because it does.
Thank you, sir.
Fear of God, the beginning of wisdom.